2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. Reads in my NIV, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And as we move toward our character example discussions, I want us to keep in mind, because this will probably linger another week, I want us to jump to Luke 6, 46, because I think that goes hand in hand when we're taking a look at what Paul says about the thorn in the flesh, and you're really reading an ideal example of he must increase, I must decrease. That's what Paul is really putting on display for you. And Jesus, this being one of Steve's foundational verses, especially for us, and I love this because I think it fits right in with John the Baptist's statement, and certainly Paul's statement here, because this is Jesus putting to the test if he is Lord of your life. And it starts out in 646, why do you call me Lord, Lord? Now, folks, why do you call me Lord, Lord? Guess what? That's not, for the most part, the unbelieving citizens of this world. Because they don't think that they have anything, number one, to be forgiven for, and they are their own lords. This is for believing people who, whether they use Jesus' name, whether they call on the Holy Spirit, whether they refer to God as Yahweh, these are folks who believe that through their church affiliation, through their church going, through their believership, through their profession of Jesus, that he is the Lord of their lives. That's who this is for. So, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you don't do what I say? And I added a little bit of that. And why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? That's got to sting if you really, really think and meditate on this. I will show you what he is like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He, it's the guy who puts them into practice, is like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid foundations on the rock. And when a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. So we talked a little bit about this last week to say, we don't think that this is a person who is going to be eternally separated from the Lord, but this is a person whose life just might have devastation and turmoil after turmoil because they're not really grounded and anchored in attempting to have their life be obedient to the Lord's calling. And I'm not talking about just the 10 commandments. I'm saying that they're committed to the love of Jesus, and that love of Jesus then helps them to always ask, what do you want? What should I be? As opposed to just following a set of rules. Because they love him so much, they're saying, I want to do what pleases you every step of the way. I'm going to try to check in with you, if not every hour, every day, during the course of the week, during the course of the month. I want to check to make sure that I'm obeying what it is that you say, because I love you that much. That's what it is that we're seeing here in Luke 6:46. So let me pause there. Any commentary? Does that sound like it makes sense in terms of its application? This is a pretty condemning scripture if you take it seriously. And I would almost tell you it's one of those things that, in your Christianity 101, this needs to be one of the themes, so that folks recognize that this is what sets maybe your worship group apart. Ecclesia, look at that. Sets it apart from other clubs that say they like Jesus a lot. This is your theme. If we love Jesus, if we are going to call him Lord Jesus, then we're going to endeavor to do what he commands. And not because they're the law, but because we call him Lord. And we call him Lord willingly because of what he's done for us. And he's loved us so greatly that our love for him is we want what's best from our lives for him. And that's calling him Lord and doing what he commands. That's what we endeavor to set us apart from other church clubs, other church organizations, because we have lots of church denominations that like Jesus a whole lot. And if they don't like Jesus a whole lot, they like stories about Jesus. This Luke 6:46 challenges you to go deeper than that. It's not about liking Jesus a lot or loving things about Jesus. It's about what's the evidence. The evidence is if I check in on you and I check your accountability, and I like that Steve did this because this has become a discussion point, certainly between Brother Bruce and myself and some other folks. If when I ask you about what makes you a good person, right? And recognize I'm already using a loaded word. But when I ask you what makes you a loaded person, and your response to me begins with I, you don't understand this passage in Luke 6. You don't understand the passage in 2 Corinthians 12. If when you begin when I ask you why you're a good person, you say, well, because I, unless what happens after that is because I believed in what Jesus did, and what Jesus did gets ascribed to me, and that, and only that, makes me good. Anything other than that, you might as well just be pulling prizes out of a cereal box, because it's got as much value as current Cracker Jack prizes. So let me pause there. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I got 3, and the first one I'll do last. Cracker Jack prizes have gone way downhill since I was a kid. I mean, really bad. But that's really not a spiritual thing there. The second thing that comes to mind is, as you were reading that passage in Luke, I was reminded of an old gospel song. You may or may not know it, called "Sending Up Boards." You ever heard this?
We call it "Sending Up My Timbers" in the gospel arena.
Okay. Yeah, and the idea is what we do day by day that is Jesus oriented is helping to build our eternal home in heaven. Okay. Now apply that to the house built on the rock and the house built on the sand. While the illustration is an earthly one, I think the application may be a heavenly one. Okay. And so that's the second thing is when we read that, we need to maybe think about what are we doing for the house that we're going to move into for eternity? Mm-hmm. The third thing is the first thing, really, and that is that first verse in verse 46. Both the word calling, why do you call me, and the negative of not doing are both in the Greek present active indicative. That means nothing to you, I know. But what that means is there's a constancy to the activity. You're constantly saying, Lord, 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 but you're not treating him constantly as Lord, 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 because you're saying, and again, I'm as guilty as anybody here this past week. I say he's Lord, at the same time, he says that I should, as I go, proclaim, testify, to be a witness, to make disciples. I'm not doing that when I go. When I'm staying at home, I'm pretty safe, I guess. But when I go out into the culture, I'm failing miserably. And so there is a constancy to the proclamation of his lordship, but there's also a constancy to the failure to do what he's commanded.
So I like what you said, especially when you brought in kind of the disclaimer of I'm okay when I stay in my house, because this has been a theme that I alluded to a lot during our COVID meetings, which is this. The current day that we're in right now has given Christians permission to not as they go. It has given permission to Christians and regular people alike to stay where you are. And so, and you've heard me say this before, and so evangelizing is not something that you can do safely. So you shouldn't do it, because that's not a safe practice for you. So when Brother Gene says, well, I think I'm okay when I am in my house, well, that's why this work at home, that's why that not needing to interact with people has so enraptured our American culture, because especially for us church folks, we don't have to incorporate ourselves in other folks' day, let alone be exposed to them, because by gosh, that's unsafe.
Yeah, I'm just again, and I'm at the pharmacy. I'm waiting to pick up a prescription. They've just gone to their half-hour meal break, and so they're, because the certified person is not on duty, no one can dispense anything. And so I'm in line and talking to the guy behind me who, hey, what's going on at the pharmacy guy? He initiates the conversation, and then we talk very, very briefly, and I try to explain to him that, they just got back from dinner and that kind of thing. And by the time I get up to the counter, I realize I'm at the wrong version of CVS, and so I have to go to the correct one. So, but yeah, going to the right location is what brought that to mind. But yeah, we're there is a comfort to being at home. There is a security to being at home, and I think I've gotten so used to that, I'm not out and about very much anymore, particularly since church is here too.
Sure.
So I need to re-exercise those muscles, and I appreciate your admonition. We'll get to that word in our message today to talk about that.
Intentionality plays a role. And it's one thing to do it monthly, it's another thing to do it weekly, and then it's another thing to even consider it daily. And that means for those of us sometimes that can work virtually or work at our residences, so then at the end of your day, maybe that's the time where you intentionally go and commune with other people. So just throwing that out there. So I want you to consider, if you will, the bookends of 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. And I want you to really consider, that is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. And then Jesus saying, why do you call me Lord, Lord, if you won't do what I say? And I told you that we would start this week with a couple of questions. And so we've started with our typical question. We've had sometimes our delightful discourse that sometimes follows what our responses are. But the two questions that we ended on last week that we said that we were going to pick up are what you're watching Sarah shake her head about. And she has just put her camera on mute and on blind. And I appreciate where Sarah is on this because, my wife jokingly says this. It's one of the mantras around our house is that the first step to addressing your problem is admitting you have a problem. And so that's why I love that Sarah will often own her stuff. And here's why. Sarah jokes about it, and sometimes she'll say, you guys are beating me up. But here's the thing, folks, we all have attended worship and church services with people who act like they've got discharge that has no aroma. We know folks who don't own their own messiness. So look, see, you guys, it's slow, but eventually it catches up with you. So we know folks who won't own their own junk. And we've observed them, if we've not experienced them, engaging in their own junk. And then when you sort of say, you know, is this something you struggle with? Well, no, you don't have anybody owning that that's the arena in which they live. And so I always appreciate that about Sarah. Whether it's that or the thought bubbles that just come alive, because I think that our worship groups would be healthier with people who had attitudes like Sarah, who just own it and say, yeah, look, stinking up the joint. I got this going on. Because sometimes by doing that, you recognize you're not the only, you're not the only X in the circle bin. So I also think that that's why Jesus built the church out of people, because that camaraderie, that college of people together is one that's supposed to allow folks to draw strength from the fact that they need to lean excessively on Jesus, and at the same time they're successful because of the leaning. That's 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. And that's a guy, and you know what? Here's the other thing. Let me make a point that is not here in our scripture before I ask the 2 questions. When Paul talks about this thorn in the flesh and he writes about it, again, please, this is just conjecture. Because Paul understands the power of writing, and maybe didn't understand that it was going to be something that permeates till 2,000, 3,000 years later, but he understood that writing is a serious component, and probably understood that Peter said that the writings of Paul are essentially scripture. So he understood its impact and its import. But I would also maybe strongly say this. Paul recognized that he needed to keep general this thorn in the flesh because of how people operate. But I might also suggest that the people closest to Paul knew exactly what this was. That Timothy, that John Mark, that Silas, that Barnabas, maybe even Peter knew what this was, but for progeny's sake and to keep us focused on the main, which is focused on Jesus and not the idiosyncrasy that Paul would mention, we don't know what it is. And I see Gene kind of nodding his head there that makes a kind of sense. And that's a matter of wisdom and discernment that I think that Paul also gets as part of the gifting. Is what needs to belong in Scripture and then what doesn't need to be there. So focusing on the strength of 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, and then looking at the why do you call me Lord, Lord, and you don't do what I say? So the 2 questions I'm posing, at least this week, and let's see how far we get because we may need to go beyond that, are you a control freak, right? And are you obsessive compulsive? Now, here's the funny thing. Control freak may be one that Sarah kind of owns because of the nature of how it makes itself obvious in the Jenkins household. But I would bet you a lot of us are control freaks that don't necessarily know that we're control freaks. Things have to be the way we say or the way we think they're supposed to be. Otherwise, it messes up our whole day. So that's the question posed out to you, both of those. Are you control freak or are you obsessive compulsive?
I'm the second.
Oh, yeah.
And see, and I will tell you that I am the first, because I can't lie because I got 3 of my people on the call with me. So if I lie, I'm going to be beaten up later. But and I struggle because yes, thanks, Steve. I don't think I'm obsessive compulsive, but Nathan corrected me, and he said sometimes being a control freak actually leads to obsessive compulsiveness.
Right.
So, and I was like, okay. So I've been pondering on that, trying to figure that part out. But I do like things done in certain ways and in certain orders because I know it works and I know what I need to do to get things done. And when things get out of whack, I get a little stressed. Just a little.
I think I'm a control freak I know I
Yeah.
am at work because they pay me to be.
Right.
They
Right.
put me in charge of something. What but it's only on the things that matter to me or to my boss. Um, I don't really sweat the small things.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely at home, I don't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know I have no authority around here. So,
Are you saying I'm the control freak?
but yeah, and I don't think I'm obsessive compulsive at all because I definitely have a guy that works for me that is, and it's funny to watch people just mess with him because his desk is perfect. Everything has to be in a certain way, and guys will walk by, and if he's not in there, they'll step in and just quarter turn something. And the second he walks back in his room, he looks at it, and we watch it. It's so funny, but um, I'm like Sarah. I do believe that can lead, being in control can lead to obsessive compulsive if you take it too far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so basically what you're saying is, because I'm OCD, I've already acknowledged I'm also a control freak. Because I will own the OCD, and because again, as Sarah said, to deny it in this meeting because you guys know me would just be foolish. Because I mean, you talked about the work desk. When I was in New York, this is one of the funniest things. My desk was, I mean, two things. Number one, the joke used to be they would walk up to my desk and go, well, if a cluttered desk is a sign of a cluttered mind, what's the sign of an empty desk? What does an empty desk mean? Because mine was empty. And then the other thing was my boss came around to my desk with his boss, and my boss wanted a manual. Now this is back in the day when I was in a cubicle that had the overhead bins in addition to the desk and drawers underneath. And as he asked me for that, he nudged Al, his boss, and goes, "Watch this." I did my normal thing. I opened my tray, pulled out the key, unlocked the cabinet, pulled out the manual he wanted, closed the cabinet, locked it back, and put the key back in the tray. That made sense to me. But that was back in the 80s. So I've been OCD for a while.
So Jerry shared, I think, a really neat, distinctive truth. And I think if you consider it, it makes perfect sense in light of the discussion that we're having right now. And this is it. At work, Jerry's paid to practice being a control freak. At work, Jerry may also be paid, and maybe even you in some regard, Gene, in that scenario you just posed, you were paid to be obsessive compulsive. Is that when folks want to know where the lint is, because you collected it every day and they want to say, can you show me the lint that was in the dryer? Okay, well, this is the guy that has it. In the work environment, that makes much sense because that's a lot like a lot of the parables that Jesus talks about when he instructs folks to take care of certain things for him, right? But I also then very much appreciated Brother Jerry saying, well, that's what I do because I'm paid to do it at work. Pretty much when I come home. No, I can't do that this way. Now, and I think that there are things that are in our lives, if we're honest about it. We may not be obsessive compulsive about it, because certainly knows when I want to visit that, I'll spend time with Brother Gene, and I'll do things that wouldn't bother most people, but that will bother Gene because he's very observant. And some of those things bother my wife a little bit, but not as much. Like I'll pull my pocket out of my pants, or put a piece of paper somewhere where Gene doesn't think it should be, and then see how long it takes him to have to pick it up. And see, that's where your obsessive compulsiveness turns into control freak. Because there are some folks I've known in my life that are obsessive compulsive, but they're not control freaks, in that it bothers them and it makes their head explode, but they're not going to go and fix it. They're not going to go and make it the way they want to. And so that's always a challenge for me when I'm in the presence of someone who's an obsessive compulsive party, because I also then want to see how much of a control freak do you have to be. Because here's the issue. If the obsessive compulsive thing is about me or on my body, you don't have an ability to tell me how to operate. And so that's always a fun barometer to throw out there to see how far does this OCD go. And I would suggest to you that in a fun, but in a certainly more important way, that's what you're seeing here, perhaps in some regard, with the admonishment and the encouragement that you're getting from Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, followed up by Jesus saying, if you call me Lord, why don't you do what I say? Because can you see the problem with a thorn in the flesh if you're a control freak or if you're OCD? Can you see the problem?
Because that's out of your control, right?
Right.
And when things are out of your control and you tend to lean a little more to the control freaky side, yeah, that's going to really, really bug you because you can't do thing one about it. No matter what you do, it ain't going to change.
Right. That's your weakness that Paul alludes to in 2 Corinthians, and you're not okay reveling in your weakness. You feel
We're
exposed.
Americans. We don't do weak.
Correct.
No, I'm just, I have two places, and Jerry talked about being at home. I have two places in our house that I have some semblance of control over. Okay? My desk and my dresser. Other than that, I really can't touch anything. I certainly can't go in the kitchen. If and I do go in there to collect, and I forage in there a little bit to find food. That's about all I go in there to do. That's her domain. I leave that alone. But yeah, I hadn't thought of. This is why you're such a good teacher, Preston. I had not thought about the release that Paul exhibits when he says only 3 times. Okay, I'm good. I will deal with it. I'm not gonna put your pockets back in. I'm not gonna pick up the paper you intentionally dropped that I didn't know you intentionally dropped. I thought it was blah blah blah. You know, Paul is saying, okay, 3 times and I'm done. I mean, can we do that? Like Sarah said, no, we're not weak. We're Americans. We're gonna strive for this until we get what we think. There's a word that we see on television all the time. What we deserve.
Correct.
We don't deserve this.
Correct.
And you go back to the passage, the excessive revelations. And by the way, the Greek here is just amazing because it's English words. Excessive is hyperbole.
Okay. Yeah.
For our English person.
Okay.
And Revelations is apocalypse.
Right.
Okay. And both of them have definite articles in front of them. So there's a definiteness there, an identification, because he's got all of this going on so that he doesn't get all conceited. Basically, God, and I hate to use this expression because some people see God as being the divine smackdown guy, but this is kind of what he does to Paul. He kind of smacks him down, saying, puts him in line so that he can actually be more useful in the world he's in. So,
thank you for that. Look, sometimes I use bookend, and I use that sometimes in the scripture because if you do it well, the Old Testament and the New Testament prove each other, and that's why I say bookend a lot, because this isn't the first time we see the Lord doing this. One of the first examples that comes to my mind is Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel because the Lord makes Jacob dependent on him to get him to be Israel. And so that's thousands of years previous to Paul having this encounter where the Lord says, I need to keep you in check. I need to keep you in check. And that's this. And that keeping in check, and I like that Brother Gene brings this up. Paul limits himself to 3 times asking. Now, one of Brother Dean's favorite passages is Abraham bargaining with Yahweh for the amount of good people that he's going to allow Sodom and Gomorrah to remain for, right? And if I understand Adam's discussions, he doesn't stop at 3 times. He's going to keep going almost, and then the Lord just says, just look, stop. Just stop asking me. If we find X good people, I'm not going to blow it up. So Abraham, who's God's friend, keeps going to the point where the Lord just says, let me just get to the final number. Paul goes 3 times and goes, you know what? I'm not going to let them. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to preoccupy myself with this. I'm not going to spend any brain power on this. I'm not going to be concerned about this because I'm going to completely give this up, recognizing that in my weakness, and let me exchange that for another word, in my nakedness, I'm okay with the Lord shining through this, even though I'm grossly exposed.
I'm at present looking up the word that we have translated as delight. It says take delight, but it also says consent.
Sure.
That's an amazing word in that context. And hang on just a second. I'm a little bit okay. It's it's going to be good pleasure. He takes good pleasure in the situation he's in. And I appreciate your comment about and okay, this is going to make, don't get your head too swollen here. This is going to make you more Paul-like, because in this passage, because the people you mentioned and probably others knew what the issue was, he was talking in code like you do to kind of say, this is what happened. Those of you who are in the know will know what it is, but I don't want to reveal that to everybody, and we don't know why. The point being, we may have something that is like that we need to be content in. We need to be consenting to. We need to have good pleasure in that we have that issue, whatever it is. And it may be a physical issue. It may be a spiritual issue. Some have said that maybe because he comments about somebody giving them his eyes. And so it may have been an eye issue, ophthalmological eye kind of thing, not a personal pronoun eye. And that could be either a physical eye issue or maybe a spiritual eye issue. And so we get to the place where we're able to say, we don't know what it is, but what he did can apply to me too in this area. And we don't have to tell everybody what that area is. I'm not sure I can stop at 3 though. That's probably the big thing.
Yeah. If you have access to the creator of the universe, and he's already earlier said, ask and keep asking, ask and keep on asking. Why would you stop at 3? Well, it would appear that the interaction between him and Jesus suggests very strongly, look, I'm going to give you 3 of those, and then you're done.
Well, there are two aspects of that come to mind. Number one, you're right. We're given an instruction to importunity.
Right.
We're given that, but at the same time, wow, how can I say this without really getting myself buried? There are people in this world, I'll say it this way, that you can ask them a question or request something, and they will give you a look. Okay? There's an episode of Home Improvement where the hardware store owner's wife had mastered this look that, don't touch that issue. Don't touch that question. Don't ask me that. And it's possible that in a spiritual sense, when Paul asked the third time, he got the look in some way or another. And God said, by the look, okay, I'm not supposed to ask that anymore. Thank you.
Look, I think that we're having fun with some of the gray that's not there, but I also think that it reads very strongly that Paul had a very close and intimate relationship with Jesus. And so, when that look says you've overstayed your not only welcome, but you've overstayed your question. You know when that happens. And that happens with folks that you're intimate with and that you have a sincere relationship with. You know that the asking is no more import, and it's probably something that is a door you need to pretty much shut.
Here's a fun fact, and Michaela may never see this, so I can say this. She's been working on the look. She's been trying to master this art herself because she's seen it in other people, and I'll just go that far. So, and she's been trying to see if she can master this look to try to, get the back off to happen, and she's trying it with me, and that ain't gonna work. So anyway,
I think kids have minimal success with mastering the look, especially because when the look then is followed up by "give me," the look doesn't get you very far. But you have to appreciate people working out and trying to at least develop the muscle. So if we could make
you gotta have some authority to give the look.
Agreed. And so if we have people working muscle on all of the cylinders, not just the look, but also spirituality and commitment to Jesus, all of those things create a pretty balanced individual, as opposed to just working on one thing. And I like Brother Gene's commentary because I'm very pleased that we've got the whole Jenkins clan hanging out with us. We've got the Howards. But there are usually more people that are a part of this interaction that I think would not even benefit only from the questions, but I would appreciate their input, because as we launch into the next couple of questions, this whole miasma of stuff that is about human behavior, activity, and thinking keeps us away from finding joy in this Corinthians 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. He says that he finds delight in weakness, insult, and persecutions, and in difficulties. That's everything. It's everything bad that you never want to visit your doorstep. And he says, kind of like one of his scriptural brethren, count it all joy. So, when you want to think that the harmony, that the scriptures contradict each other, because James is talking a whole lot about works and faith, for the most part, there's a lot of places where Paul and James are they're strumming the same note. And this is one of those. Persecution follows the fact that you've professed and now you're possessing Jesus. And if you're doing what follows because you say, Lord, Lord, then you're going to have difficulties. You're going to have hardships. You're going to have insults. And then that's going to lend itself to to the last question I'm going to ask, but not today. It'll lend itself to second to last question. So let me ask these two, because the control freak, the OCD stuff, it's kind of fun there, but you can see when we really take a look at it and kind of take away its facade and then kind of distill it down, it's really about it's excuse the pun, it's your way and not Yahweh, right? So you're not really taking joy, taking comfort in having your weaknesses not even exposed, but having them that you've got to deal with them. You want out. You're not necessarily feeling comforted. You're not feeling at your best because Jesus is supposed to be shining and prioritized. You're pretty much feeling like I'm wasting away here. You're not getting the best of me, and that's not a good thing. So let me ask these two. And again, I wish we had our normal contingents, a contingency as a participation here, and maybe we'll even revisit some of this next week, but from a different angle to have some of the input. So here's the next couple of questions. Do you grumble or complain? And then the second question is, do you manage your anger? Do you grumble or complain? Do you manage your anger? Those are questions, they're presented. Volley's out your way.
I grumble or complain sometimes, and I sometimes manage my anger. It really and truly depends. Again, if the three boys that you see here are actually here, they would probably agree with you. But I'm one that I tend to wear my feelings on my sleeve. Good, bad, or ugly, it doesn't matter.
Surprising.
Wow. Okay, good.
I'm probably going wow because I actually admitted it.
There we go.
Hmm.
So, for the first question, I'm just going to say typically not.
Yep. Yep.
There may be extreme instances, but I typically don't complain or grumble. The second, and this is gonna, I'm sorry, it's gonna sound like a Sunday school answer, but no, I don't manage my anger, but the Lord does. When I was a teenager, I was an angry person. I was a throw things person. I was, I was very, very angry. Of course, I understand in adolescence, that's the two words that describe adolescence is fear and anger. So I get that. But something happened where I don't even remember the exact moment, but somehow the Lord has begun to work on me in such a way that it is very, very, very rare that I get really, really angry. I mean, and it's really such that if I get angry, it's almost Incredible Hulk angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Okay, so that's the Lord doing that. I cannot take any ownership of that. That's the Lord working in my life because naturally speaking, I can be very, very angry, but the Lord keeps that in check. He manages it. I really cannot say that I do.
So I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little loaded, and I usually try to refrain from saying things that are loaded because
yeah, right.
Maybe I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time, but or maybe my hearing and my ability to perceive discussions and conversations as more acute than a lot of folks. Surprisingly, I hear lots of church people grumble and complain regularly, to the point where, and I've told you some of the stories. Some of those stories, I will walk away from some folks because in perpetuity, they complain and they grumble. There are some folks I have said to them, I have a difficult time talking to you because everything sounds like it's a complaint. And these are church people. Look, I expect folks who are unchurched, folks who are spiritual, I expect them to regularly complain and grumble and gripe. I expect that because they're always looking for the bigger and the better, and they don't know what the answer to that is. So no matter what their job is, no matter what their finances are, no matter what their family situation is, no matter what their health is, they're always going to find issue with it. I'm perfectly fine with that. It's always a little startling for me when people who profess that they possess Jesus are some of the major grumblers and complainers I know.
So I hope you're not talking about me.
No, you know what's funny? Since you brought that up, you never complain. Now, but there's also a reason for that. And folks, look, for you folks watching this on recorded quality or in virtual land, watching this afterwards, this is not going to be just a Preston Gene interaction. Hopefully, this is one that adds benefit to a lot of folks. One of the neat bonuses about who you are, Brother Gene, is that the Lord's created you to be a problem solver. I thoroughly and truly embrace and believe that. And I think that it's really difficult for problem solvers to either stay or to practice a lot grumbling and complaining. Because the problem solver is always saying, what didn't I do well? How do I fix this? And what do I need to do better to get it to where it needs to be less of an issue? And if many of us church people had that mindset, the grumbling and the complaining and the griping would be a lot less. So that's usually my perspective where it is in my relationship over the years watching you. So when you say, Brother Gene, that I'm going to give you the Sunday school answer that the Lord manages my anger. Yep, guess what? I've heard about your past, and I also know you now, and I am going to say, hands down, that's the right and the best answer. And that's not such a Sunday school answer. That's really the true answer. It really is. Because I don't know, and I think some of you will get on board with this. There are times when my anger is a very different one than it used to be a long, long time ago. But when I do get angry, probably the person that sees it the most is the person closest to me. Because as I've gotten older, one of the things I kind of value, and I would hope it's something that you all perceive as well, is it's only people and maybe very in serious situations close to me that can make me angry. Other than that, I don't waste the time. Yeah. So my wife can make me angry. My kids can make me angry. Probably some of us that gather and worship together can make me angry. Now, how that anger manifests itself, that's certainly where I ask the Lord, help me not to be a consuming fire. Let me put that in regular people terms. Help me not to be a big, huge jerk because I'm angry about a situation. But griping and complaining and grumbling. Thank you, Sarah, for saying that it's something that happens. Look, ultimately, if we put this into the camp of Paul, we shouldn't be doing that. And in fact, I think I've seen other scriptures that say, don't grumble, don't complain. But look, we live in this world and we live in these tents we live in, to use good Bible terms. So that means we're going to struggle until we get glorified. We're going to struggle until our ultimate sanctification, which, man, oh man, I'm looking forward to every day. Right? So I know how to pray for Sarah in a constructive way when she says, I almost hit Steve over the head with the house, but I couldn't pick it up. Okay, well, now I know how to pray for her. I need to pray for her to have She-Hulk-like strength. so that she indeed can hit Steve over the head with the house when that's necessary. But okay, well, oh well, Steve, you brought that on yourself. I appreciate the tears. So see, and that's where we're going to better partner with each other when we can pray for and each other in a meaningful sense and an ongoing sense. And so that's why sometimes when brother Jerry might say, "Hey, pray for me and Sherry because we're dealing with COVID." Okay, well here's the thing: I regularly pray for Sherry and Jerry, and Delaney and Laverne and Garrison and the whole extended Howard clan. But now I know specifically to pray about the COVID thing, so that they don't become consumed by what COVID potentially brings to people's doorsteps. So it's recognizing that we're not all Pauline. We're not all Pauline-like. And so by coming to camp and talking about our failures and our failures to launch, well, then that helps us to put in our toolbox and help us equip ourselves with the right armor for the next opportunity as the campaign commences. But we're not that forthcoming. We're not that honest in that regard. So let me pause for a second there. Thoughts?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the validation that in addition to your nodding when I said I really don't complain, I appreciate that. And the problem solving, there's something there that I hadn't thought of before, because I've said repeatedly, I am as creative as a post, except when it comes to problem solving. That's where I manifest creativity. I can, and I almost say I'm MacGyver-like in that I can do things a little differently in order to solve a problem. So yeah, that's where my creativity comes in. When there's a problem, we need to solve it. And by the way, one other little note, Steve mentioned that Sarah is a terrible poker player. When she comes in on Sunday mornings to this place, I can tell what kind of morning she's had by the look on her face. Bless her heart. And I mean, she is in some ways the exact opposite of me. She's a female in a house of 3 males. I'm a male in a house of 3 females, speaking of people only. Let's don't talk about the cats. So I can understand where the frustration could be. And I'm going to be honest, I think that guys are a lot more frustrating than girls are. So
it depends on how fluid your masculinity or your femininity is that particular day, hour, or week, because all that stuff changes.
Yeah, well, let's get off the biology altogether at that point. But yeah.
I like your point, Brother Gene, and maybe this will be kind of our ending thought as I close and then open this up for you guys. When we say things like, okay, I'm a problem solver when there's a problem, but we also say things to the extent of, well, I'm not really creative and I don't know what to do in that event, except if there was a problem, I know what to do. What that also suggests is that our discernment and our awareness may need to exponentially change. So that, not that we see all things as a problem, but we see all things as something with an ability to get better than it currently is. And if that in some ways extracts our creativity, our ability to, and my apologies to the Howards, to the Jenkins, to the Thomasons, to our ability to skin a cat 7 or 18 different ways, then I'm going to encourage that that's the mindset that we want to have, because a thing is not a problem just because I identify it as a problem. A thing is a problem sometimes because it's stagnant, because in many ways it's the size of a redwood, but its roots are dead. So the question gets to be, how do we revitalize? How do we renew? How do we nourish And just because I may not be a horticulturalist, or I may not have the acumen of someone who likes plants, well, if I don't have access to my wife, I know Jerry Howard. And so Jerry Howard can help me to recognize something that I didn't see before was an issue. And now creatively, I can add that to my toolbox. I can add that to my equipment case. And now that I didn't see as a problem or as something that was a difficulty before is now something I understand has the ability to be better than that which I see. And church people sometimes are content to let folks stay where they are. And especially because we don't believe that we can change people, and we can't, then we don't want to mess. But that's why we're going to revisit, hopefully next week we'll have a larger contingent joining us. We're going to revisit maybe these questions en route to our last two questions before we jump into our Bible figures, because the nice part about the reality in the exchange that we've just had about grumbling and complaining, that may not prove to be so problematic among the gang that's assembled today. But I can tell you, it's a really big challenge to flip the switch from I have to I get to. Right? And I say this in the way that you've heard me introduce it before. I'm proud is probably an underestimated word, but I'm very glad for Jerry and Sherry having Laverne as a part of their family, because goodness knows having not only another adult, but having your parent live in your house where they now have to follow your rules, right, is a huge, not only inconvenience potentially, but a huge factor for strain and stress. And everything I get always from Jerry and Sherry, even with, well, this wasn't such a great day, this wasn't such a great week, is we get to. We get to. As opposed to, well, oh boy. Oh boy. Because that's that grumbling and complaining. And that is not allowing, through difficulties, through persecutions, through insults, that's not allowing Jesus to be supreme. Because right now you all need to listen to me complain and moan about it. And I'm not saying that we can't do that with each other, but almost like, and this is why I'm glad that Brother Gene brought this up, almost like Paul complaining about it 3 times, maybe we want to think after that how to figure out how to give honor to the Lord that it exists and we get to battle with it. And let it go. And that's why we may need to revisit this when we have a different contingent, because maybe some of us in this meeting today do that better than some of us others. And that's a lesson that comes directly from this 2 Corinthians 12 and Luke chapter 6. When you put them together and you're in the middle of that sandwich, this is the challenge when you apply it to your life. Grumbling and complaining, we get it. But maybe you need to limit that bad boy to 1, if not maybe 3 times. And then afterwards, you got to live with it. And you got to live with it with joy, with delight. Even sometimes you get to brag about it, even if you don't need to tell me all the particulars of the bogging down that occurs in your life. And then call it a day and let's celebrate it together. Because the fact, and you guys have seen this before, people always want you to pray for their, and surprisingly, this is even church people. And I hope that we get to challenge this differently when it happens to me. We want recovery for our people when they're sick or they're ill or they're in the hospital with something maybe fatal or terminal. But recognize, if they get to keep living, they have to come back to some of this stuff. They're going to come back to some of this stuff. So if they're going to come back to some of this stuff, let's help them while they're healthy and hale to own it with a sense of delight, with a sense of Jesus and Christ-like glee. Okay, I dig it. I know it's a complaint. And that means I'm fine laughing with Jerry and Sherry going, well, it's a Laverne day. And they very rarely do. But I could get that because the tongue-in-cheek nature of it's a Laverne day is one that in the back of the fundamental part of that is we get to hang out with my mom-in-law, with Sherry's mom, even though it's kind of a pain in my depends. So on that silly kind of note, thoughts, comments as we close this part of our worship today? All right, we're gonna open up this pot of worms a bit next week. Again, our contingent's different, so it'll be similar ground that we tread, but you guys have already been here, so you can help me as veterans be able to explore some of the challenges of these two questions: grumbling, complain, and griping, right? And I just add griping, which isn't part of the question, and then managing your anger. Because I believe that inherent yes, sir. Oh, hello, Steve.
I just want to say that, I'm finding these questions a little bit irritating. They're kind of upsetting me a bit, and I can't believe you would ask them. They're kind of grinding my gears, and quite frankly, they're making me angry. I'm going to lose my temper in just a minute, so I'm just going to shut up here.
I'm shutting up too because I've already said too much.
And now you know why I'm like the way I am sometimes.
I always appreciate that coming from Brother Steve. The funny thing is, Steve saying that, I've had people say similar to what Steve is saying, but not with their tongue in their cheek at all. With the same kind of growing hostility that Brother Steve had, which is, if you don't stop asking those questions, I'm leaving. So I think they're always valid and viable questions to ask. I thank Brother Steve because his response is what we really have, because you're stepping on my toes, you're messing in my territory. You don't need to be asking me that. It's none of your beeswax. Jesus' church is supposed to be bigger than that. At least that's what I get. I'm not going to tell you that what doesn't kill me make me stronger. That's not it at all. But knowing Steve and Sarah and Jerry and Gene and some of the stuff that Nate and Daniel are going through, that just adds to my ability to not only know that this stuff exists, but to then be in position to say, okay, Lord, when and if it happens, help prepare me for it. Put me in a position to count it all joy, as difficult as that is, because I know that these experiences are out there. So, thank you, Steve. I appreciate your anger. That would have been great for a call-in talk radio show. That would have been great. That would have driven ratings right through the roof for my radio show. So, doggone it. Let's pray, and then let's move on to, as Brother Gene would say, number next thing.